An economy can feel like a big paddock full of grass. At times it's flourishing, the roots are working, the soil's fantastic, the sun's shining and there's just enough rain and we're all in clover. And then there are other times when you've had months and months of drought, maybe some sort of disease has struck the particular crop you've got, the roots are dying off, and the grass is not green at all. In fact, it's very brown. We've just had a recession where not so much the weather caused the recession, although obviously Cyclone Gabrielle was an issue. And right at the moment, there are parts of New Zealand that are actually in physical drought. But in this case, this was a man-made recession, so to speak. The man being Adrian Orr, and you could argue the government played a role here over the last year. But we've just come out of one of our worst recessions in decades. The June and September quarters of 2024 saw our GDP fall 2.2%. And we've just seen a slight rebound, 0.7% in the December quarter. And when you go looking through the paddock to see what's thriving and what's not, you can see it's not a clear picture. And the man-made recession, the Reserve Bank turning up with a flamethrower, really did quite a number on the paddock. This week on When the Facts Change, we talked to Sabrina Delgado, an economist at Kiwibank, to find out where the green shoots and the brown roots actually are in our economy and whether they're going to green up a bit later this year. That's this week on When the Facts Change. Well, kia ora and welcome to Sabrina Delgado from Kiwibank to talk about the economy in the wake of our GDP stats, find out where are the green shoots and where are the brown roots in the economy, the bits that are thriving and that really aren't. Starting with the green shoots, what are we seeing from these GDP figures and from the more recent numbers about where things are going for it?
Yeah, Bernard. Well, thanks for having me back. I think it's a really exciting time to be back to be able to discuss sort of the first step in New Zealand's economic recovery. We did just have the latest GDP numbers, which, saw that after a couple of hefty contractions in the June quarter and the September quarter, actually a very hefty decline, about 2.2% cumulative decline over those 6 months alone, that we actually finally took our first step into recovery. The economy actually expanded 0.7% over the quarter, which is much higher than we were expecting and the Reserve Bank were expecting. They were expecting a 0.3% lift in activity. So we're definitely starting to see an improvement in the economy. It is off a very low base, but there's definitely multiple areas that we're seeing quite a lot of growth. If we look at just the GDP numbers alone, we saw that 11 out of the 16 industries measured actually posted lifts in activity over the quarter.
And of those 11, what were the standouts?
Yeah, so we saw particular strength across the services, particularly in rental hiring and real estate and also your retail, trade and accommodation. Basically anything that's tied to that sort of tourism industry. So we have seen quite a strong rebound in tourism recently. If we look at the latest sort of tourism numbers, we're getting much, much closer to our pre-COVID levels for tourism. We were kind of flagging around 85% for the past year or two. Now, if you look at the latest numbers, we're closer to 95%. So what we saw, and according to Stats NZ, is that we had a lot higher spending from tourists over the December quarter, which really did put a bit of a boost on your hiring, your retail trade, and also things that you probably wouldn't think of immediately, like your transport group, and of course, things like your arts and rec space.
And so where are the tourists coming from?
Yeah, so I think what we noticed when we closed the border and then opened it back up, there was a long time where we were quite worried about this tourism sector because tourism went from being, our actually largest export, accounted for 20% of our exports, to then just 2%. And we thought, oh my goodness, how are we going to get back? We opened the border and we actually did see a considerable return in tourist numbers. But there was one sector that we were missing. That 20% was actually from Chinese tourists. And the reason behind that, why we weren't really seeing them, is because China's actually had a very ongoing weak economy since sort of COVID, really off the back of a property crisis there. Demand has been really weak there, and you can see that in the fact that they're actually running in deflation right now. So you don't have strong demand out of there. So obviously not a lot of global demand to probably go and travel around and come all the way to New Zealand. But that said, we're now at around 95% of tourist levels. We're still not necessarily seeing that entire Chinese cohort come back just yet, which, to me is maybe a good thing in one way because there's still some upside to the tourism industry, I'd say. I know we're going now sort of into the more quieter months, but I think there is definitely some upside there.
And who are coming and what sort of, are they spending a lot?
Yeah, so I think, we've got our usual, you've got the Australians, we always have quite a steady inflow of there. You've got the tourists from the US, and we know that usually those sort of, the further away you are, the more people seem to come and spend in New Zealand. So we have had a pretty good lift from US tourist numbers as well.
And of course, our low New Zealand dollar makes us slightly more attractive for those particularly US tourists. They come here and swap their money out at 56 cents to the dollar and 56 US cents to our dollar, which means, things which we think of as expensive may look a little bit cheaper to American tourists.
Yeah. That lower Kiwi dollar has definitely been a large driver in all of our exports, really. I mean, from sort of the services alone, travel exports over the quarter were up about 8%. So again, a lower Kiwi dollar is definitely fueling that. And also not just the tourism and services side, but also in your good exports. We've actually seen a pretty considerable lift in our primary sector. I'm reading more and more that the sort of rural sectors of New Zealand are starting to feel pretty good, and as they should, because we've seen an improvement in our terms of trade. That lifted around 3.1% over the end of last year, and that's really off the back of stronger dairy and meat prices, and we have seen that sort of continued output, strong output in that sector.
And we have this unusual situation where our product prices for dairy and meat are high, but our currency hasn't risen with it. Often you see when you have a commodity price boom that your currency rides with it to effectively act as a buffer, a softening of that. But we haven't seen that this time. What's going on there?
No, not quite. I think the story there is really the sort of widening interest rate differential between us and the US primarily is probably having the more dominant effect right now. Even though we're starting to come out of our sort of big recession, the Kiwi economy has certainly been a lot weaker than say, the US. And so we've had much faster rate relief, which has sort of brought the Kiwi dollar under some pressure. I think, we have sort of seen that low in the Kiwi dollar now because, based on what's going on globally, and I'm sure everyone's had a chat with you on the podcast about this, but there is that sort of growing risk of, okay, Trump, trade wars and tariffs, it's starting to lean away from that inflationary territory and probably more towards actually this is going to be a US slowdown, potentially a global slowdown. So I think that is sort of limiting the Kiwi from, going too much lower. But then I think in the second half of the year, once the Kiwi economy has recovered a bit more and maybe we've had a bit of a stabilization in all the offshore volatility, you're totally right that improvement in our terms of trade and our commodity prices could actually see the Kiwi dollar head higher in the second half of this year.
And is that money from tourism and from agricultural exports flooding into the economy and is that money being spent?
Well, it's really interesting. We always say, particularly for the terms of trade, for example, when we see an improvement in terms of trade, we always see it as having a really direct impact to the farmers. It's very independent ownership. So we do usually see when the terms of trade are higher that, that's going directly into the pockets of farmers to then spend. Is that being spent right now? Potentially not yet. We are hearing a lot from businesses, households that they are still really trying to rebuild their sort of household balance sheets and their their equity and things. And, it's been a tough time. A lot of sort of the consumption that we've seen over the recent years has come out of people's own pockets, right, and their savings. So I think, we will see that impact, but I'm hearing more and more that the rural sectors are starting to pick up. I'm really excited, and we'll have to come back later in the year for this episode, but I'm really excited. Sort of midway this year, we do our regional, I'll look at the regions, and I think I'm starting to think and have a feeling that we might see some really positive areas across our rural areas in New Zealand.
And those are the green shoots. Now, those areas that aren't doing so well at the moment, starting with construction, where in the December quarter we had a fall of 3.1% from the September quarter and 10.8% from a year ago. Just put that into context about how much of a fall that was.
Yeah, it's quite sad. It's quite grim. But that 10.8% fall over the year, that is like the largest fall we've seen in over 20 years if you exclude COVID period. So it's pretty significant, but also not that surprising just given the landscape. I mean, first and foremost, it was pretty foreseeable given the ongoing fall in building consents, and also sort of the activity data we've been seeing from the sector. But taking a step further back, I think, given the landscape of construction costs are still really high. Yes, they're not growing at the same pace as we used to. During that big inflation boost, we had construction costs running at around 18%. That's normalized back down to around 2%, but we haven't had any deflation in that space, right? So your construction costs now are still significantly higher than they were pre-COVID. So higher construction costs and a weak housing market, it's not really an environment conducive for the construction sector, is it?
Yeah, but we have had that 175 basis points of rate cuts. Are there any signs these brown roots of construction could turn green later in 2025?
Well, I'll say that there's no signs yet, but we are hopeful that we'll see those signs because we are, as you said, with those rate cuts feeding through, we are expecting a bit of a recovery in the housing market. Not a huge one, around 5 to 7% this year, maybe push it out a little bit more. But once we see a bit of a revitalization in the housing market, that should feed through into the construction industry. We know that construction is one of the more interest rate sensitive areas of the economy, and it's in part why they've been affected the most during this Reserve Bank induced recession. But in the same sort of vein, we do hope that those lower interest rates then help the recovery.
Because we don't have a surplus of housing or other, particularly public infrastructure. We need more railways and buses and schools and hospitals and all of that. We're still growing our population over the longer run significantly faster than A, we were 20, 30 years ago, and B, faster than in other developed countries. So it's interesting that there's still this tough situation in construction when we've definitely got a need.
It's terrible because it's the one area we don't want to be seeing this in, and you're totally right. I guess, it's the opportunity. It can be very cyclical, the construction industry, which is a bit of a shame, but I guess it leads to an opportunity. Once we're out of this cycle, what are we going to do with it? Because you're totally right. We have this affordability issue that stems from housing supply just not meeting demand.
Now, another area which has struggled a bit is services, and in particular professional services, business services. What's going on there?
Yeah, so across sort of the professional landscape of services, so things like your info media, telecommunications, your public admin, really anything business servicey related, that's had a bit of a struggle. They all posted declines over the quarter, and I think the real link there is probably still just a deteriorating labour market. We have seen over 2024 that the total hours of worked over the economy actually declined. And putting that to the business services sector, you're thinking it's really simple if you think about it. you're working less hours, you're putting out less output. So it's not really too much of a surprise there. And it does just really tie to that labour market weakness, which could still, go on for a bit longer. I don't think we're nearing the peak in the unemployment rate, but we're still sort of seeing it edge up a bit further towards sort of June this year. And that said, it's important to bring it up because things like your retail trade that posted an increase over this quarter, that's still susceptible to also a labour market because we know that consumer confidence is very closely tied to the labour market. So there's definitely some little headwinds facing the services. But overall, if we look at everything on a whole, I do think we have some strong signs of a recovery, evidence that the recovery has started.
So you're talking here about cyclical issues, relating to interest rates, what's happening internationally. But what are the structural things that are shifting the economy around at the moment? In particular, I'm thinking of retail and the increasing move online.
And also offshore. Mm-hmm. So looking at the GDP stuff, you can also look at it on the expenditure side. And, in recent sort of years, we've seen this big shift of imports of low-value goods. And, that's like your Temu effect. And I think there's two things. There is a structural component, which is, these online retailers are disrupting the game. That's definitely had an effect. And then the other side of things has just been this very high inflationary, tight financial condition environment has probably meant consumers have been looking elsewhere for the cheapest deal. But you're totally right that we do have this major disruptor coming into the market. But it's also, this move to online retailing in general does also provide opportunities for Kiwi businesses as well.
Yeah, because when you think about China, it's one of those places that hasn't seen the explosive inflation that others are seeing. And as you said earlier, they're actually seeing deflation. And they're up against some tariff headwinds around the world, which means they may not be able to sell quite as much of their stuff into the United States or into Europe, which the cheapskate in me is thinking, maybe we could get lots of even cheaper stuff from China.
Yeah, that disinflation sort of channel from China is definitely a potential sort of upside we could get from this whole global tensions and trade wars. But I think, from my perspective, I'm probably more worried about they're already not doing so great. If these sort of tariffs and these trade wars actually, hurt them a bit more, then that does pose risk for our own exports, and the demand that we face from them. So like I said, we haven't quite gotten those Chinese tourists back just yet. And I really would hate for that momentum to sort of be disrupted. And
thinking now about the next year or two, what are the potential risks that businesses, borrowers, savers should think about if they're thinking a year or two out? What are the known knowns that could pop up and either, really get the green shoots going or, brown off for some of them?
Yeah, I think we just covered it. I think right now there's really been a shift in the discussion from all the sort of risks to our sort of thinking and our central scenarios. They're no longer really coming from the domestic economy. It's all coming from offshore with Trump, trade policies, uncertainty. But I think it's important to also, take a step back and think, okay, well, we've had, as you said, 175 basis points of rate cuts with more coming. And with each rate cut, you do remove like the restrictiveness out of the economy. So we do expect things to improve from here. The lift we saw over the December quarter, it was a strong lift, but again, it's off a low base. Over the year, the economy still was 1.1% smaller than a year ago. So I think, taking this as the first step and expecting, better days ahead is definitely a message that we have.
Because you're right, it's the December quarter, it's a whole 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And as we record this, we're heading right into the end of the March quarter.
Yeah.
What have we seen in terms of the leading indicators? What are the tips of the green shoots that you look at to find out where we're going next? What are they saying?
Yeah, I know the starter is so old and we've just spent a whole episode talking about it, but it is really important. But yes, we love to look at what's happening right now and we love to look at what we think is going to happen in the future. And I'd say The sort of higher frequency data, regardless of what you look at, and if you just look at it as a whole, I'd say it is sort of reaffirming this overall message of a tentative, cautious recovery. So you have a range of indicators. I guess on the business confidence side, that's doing well. We haven't really quite seen those investment intentions, hiring intentions lift up yet, but we think that's coming. The housing market, it's getting there. We've mainly been tracking sideways, but more recently, some of the data coming out of there, we did see a 0.4% lift over the month in house prices over February, which, doesn't sound like much, but it is the biggest increase that we've had in over a year. And considering that we've got really high stock levels in the market right now, that would be tempering that growth a bit. It is still good to see, and activity's picking up there. But yes, there's still some signs that still looking out for some signs of a more sort of stronger recovery.
Yeah, in terms of the leading indicators, what are the ones that you keep a close eye on? The ones that you think, I really need to watch that one. I better not sleep through that one. Right
now, it is those investment intentions. Whether businesses feel like they are able to and even want to expand business from here. And I think we haven't quite seen that yet, but it is something that once, businesses sort of feel a firmer recovery taking place and they're more convinced that demand has returned, then I think we will see that start to take off. I think we're very much in a trust the process, rates are coming down, and that should help us get out of where we're in.
Because we've had some very strong business confidence, or at least rebounding business confidence over the last year to 15 months or so. Particularly from the end of 2023 onwards. There was a change of government. There was a lot of enthusiasm in the business community that things would get better. And often you see that turn into investment, actual investment. But there hasn't been the follow-through this time around. What's happening there?
I'd say not yet, and I think it's coming. I mean, the whole global uncertainty picture doesn't help either, especially, we are a country of exporters. So I think there's a lot of maybe a couple of alarm bells ringing for some businesses. They're trying to make sense of it all, and it's not globally, the environment, isn't really one when you've got all this on and off again tariff nonsense, right? It's not one that's conductive for sort of investing, right? You don't know what to do. So I think, business confidence does usually lead that pickup in investment intentions. So I think we will get there. It's just a matter of holding in for now.
Sabrina Delgado from Kiwibank, thank you so much for coming on to When the Facts Change to have a look up close and in detail the green shoots and the brown roots in our economy.